Emma Davis was sitting in a modest cafe in the city center, watching her tea slowly cool in her hands. Her eyes, weary from daily worries, wandered around the room, but her mind was distant, trapped in a reality far more difficult than the cozy atmosphere suggested. Her mother's health had worsened, and the medical bills were piling up desperately. Her job as a waitress barely covered her personal expenses, let alone the ongoing, expensive treatments. She needed a solution, a way out, but nothing seemed viable. Then the phone rang, and her life took an unexpected turn. On the other end of the line was Oliver Montgomery, a powerful and influential man whose presence seemed to carry the weight of the world. Emma had heard of him, as had anyone in the city. He was the kind of man who got what he wanted, and he was about to make a proposal she could never have imagined. She had met him weeks before, when she served him coffee at a business event. Something about the way he watched her seemed strange, but she ignored it. Now, here he was, offering the unthinkable, a large sum of money in exchange for her help to straighten out his son, Noah Montgomery. Oliver believed Noah, a reckless young man who had strayed from family expectations, needed someone to bring him back on track. He thought Emma could be that person. Emma hesitated, her heart racing as she listened to the details of the proposal. Noah was known for his parties, extravagant trips, and complete disinterest in the family business. Oliver, frustrated and out of patience, had decided that the only way to control his son's behavior was to manipulate his emotions. He wanted Emma to pretend to be in a relationship with Noah, believing that her presence could encourage him to change. This is madness, Emma thought. The idea of pretending feelings, of lying to someone, made her uncomfortable, to say the least. She wasn't that kind of person. However, as Oliver described the sum she would receive, enough to pay for her mother's treatments and guarantee financial relief that seemed impossible, Emma realized she was cornered. She spent the following days tormented by the proposal, wrestling with the moral dilemma it presented. Every time she looked at her mother lying in the bed of the small apartment they shared, her heart tightened more. What would she do? Could she lower herself to this? Accepting the offer felt like a betrayal of who she really was. Oliver didn't give her much time. When the afternoon of a cold, gray day came, Emma was once again at the cafe, this time with her phone in hand, Oliver's number dialed on the screen. This goes against everything I believe in, she thought, hesitating before pressing the button to complete the call. The phone rang once, twice, and then Oliver Montgomery's deep, calm voice filled the silence. Emma, have you made a decision? Emma took a deep breath, looking out at the street. People hurried by, each with their own problems, while her life seemed suspended, waiting for a choice that would change everything. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice came out firm, even though her heart was torn. I accept. Oliver paused briefly before responding, satisfied. Excellent. You'll be well compensated, I assure you. When the call ended, Emma felt the weight of her choice settle heavily on her shoulders. She had crossed a line she never imagined she would. What would happen now? What would this mean for her, for Noah, for her life? Emma stood there, staring at the phone in her hand. She knew there was no going back. The sound of the cafe door opening pulled her from her thoughts, and she looked up, surprised to see a familiar figure approaching, Noah Montgomery. Emma's heart raced when Noah Montgomery walked into the cafe. He had the look of someone used to attracting attention, tall, with slightly tousled dark brown hair and a disinterested expression, as if nothing around him was worth his notice. His blue eyes scanned the room slowly until they landed on her. Emma tried to appear calm, but she knew the reality of this meeting was far more complicated than Noah could imagine. He approached the table with confident steps, throwing himself into the chair across from her with a lazy sigh. So, he began, looking directly at her with little interest. My father said I had to meet you. Any idea why? The question was simple, but it carried a hint of sarcasm that made her feel exposed. Emma didn't know exactly what Oliver had told Noah about her, which only made her more uncomfortable. Forcing herself to smile, she tried to appear relaxed. Your father asked me to accompany you to some events. It seems he wants you to, well, change your lifestyle a bit. Noah let out a short laugh, leaning back in his chair. Of course, he does. He shook his head, laughing to himself. Typical of my father. He always thinks he can control me. He stopped laughing suddenly and stared at Emma. And you? What do you think about all this? Emma's stomach tightened. She knew she was there for reasons Noah had no idea about, and lying to him was a burden that was already weighing on her. But there was no turning back now. I think we all need a change sometimes. It could be an opportunity for you, if you let it. She knew her words sounded hollow even to herself, but she had no choice. Noah studied her for a few seconds, narrowing his eyes as if trying to figure something out in her expression. Sure. He finally said, standing up abruptly. Let's see where this goes. He threw a quick, cynical smile before leaving the cafe, leaving Emma alone. As she watched Noah walk away, Emma felt a wave of doubt wash over her. She knew Noah didn't trust her, and why should he? She was there with a purpose he didn't know, and this whole situation felt like a trap to ensnare him in something he would hate if he found out. In the following days, Emma began attending social events with Noah. They appeared together at galas, business dinners, and even some family gatherings that Noah clearly despised. Emma, for her part, tried to maintain the role she had been given, but with each new encounter, Noah's behavior only confirmed what she feared. He knew he was being manipulated, even if he didn't know exactly how. One evening, after a party at an elite private club, Noah decided to confront her. Tell me something, Emma. He stopped in the empty parking lot, the streetlights casting long shadows around them. Why are you doing this? His tone was different this time. There was no sarcasm or disinterest, but something deeper, almost as if he knew something was wrong. Emma looked at him, her heart racing. What could she say? How could she explain without revealing everything? She began, not knowing how to continue. I think you need someone to support you. Noah laughed, but this time there was sadness in his laughter. Support me? He stepped closer, his eyes fixed on her, as if searching for a hidden truth. I think there's more to this, and I'm going to find out what it is. Noah turned and got into his car, leaving Emma alone in the parking lot. She knew he was suspicious, and with each passing day, the secret of the agreement seemed harder to keep. In the days that followed, the tension between Emma and Noah continued to grow, but in an unexpected way. Noah's sarcastic and defensive behavior began to give way to something different, something more vulnerable. He was no longer just the rebellious heir everyone saw. Little by little, Emma began to see the man behind the facade. One day, after a social event that left Noah visibly irritated, he invited her to a quieter place. They drove to the end of a remote road, stopping in a clearing that overlooked the distant lights of the city. Noah had been silent the entire drive, which made Emma anxious. She knew he was suspicious of something, but she didn't know to what extent. You know, Noah finally said, turning off the car, you never asked what I want to do with my life. Emma, surprised by the sudden change in the conversation, looked at him with curiosity. I didn't know you wanted to talk about that. Noah let out a humorless laugh and shook his head. No one wants to know. Everyone thinks my life is already decided. I'm Oliver Montgomery's son. It's like that's enough. He paused, looking at the horizon before continuing. But that's never been enough for me. Emma watched him closely, trying to understand what he meant. There was a weight in his words that she hadn't expected. So, what do you want to do? He remained silent for a few seconds before getting out of the car and walking to the trunk. Emma followed him, curious. When he opened the back of the car, she saw something that surprised her, a high-quality camera, carefully stored in a leather case. Photography? Emma asked, surprised, as Noah took out the camera and held it with a delicacy she never would have expected from him. Yes, photography, he replied, with a half-smile that seemed to carry a mix of shame and pride. My father hates it. Says it's a waste of time, that it has no future. But he looked at the camera in his hands, as if it were the only thing that made sense in his life. It's what makes me feel alive. For a moment, Emma saw a different Noah. He was no longer the arrogant and angry young man she had met at parties and events. Before her stood someone deeply passionate about something the world around him despised. And, for the first time, she felt she was seeing the real Noah. He turned to her and raised the camera. "Can I take a picture of you?" Emma laughed, surprised by the request. "Me? Here?" Noah nodded. "Yes. Not as someone pretending to be part of my life, but as yourself." He looked at her with a seriousness that made her forget, for a moment, the reason she was there. She hesitated, but after a moment, she agreed. "Okay." Noah smiled, and with a simple click, he captured her. The sound of the camera seemed to echo between them, and Emma felt exposed in a different way, but at the same time, liberated. For the first time, she realized that Noah was really seeing her, not as part of a facade. As they spent more time together, Emma began to learn more about Noah, and he about her. Their conversations became more personal. He talked about his love for photography, the trips he always dreamed of taking, the projects he never had the courage to start. Emma listened attentively, while the weight of the secret she carried became unbearable. One night, as they were returning from another outing, Noah abruptly stopped the car in front of Emma's apartment. He looked at her in a way that sent a chill down her spine. "I never thought I'd say this," he began, his voice low and hesitant, "but I'm starting to trust you, Emma." Emma's heart raced. His words, which should have sounded like a compliment, hit her like a knife. The weight of the lie seemed to crush her at that moment. She didn't know how much longer she could bear keeping the secret. She wanted to tell him, wanted him to know the truth, but she was afraid of losing him completely. Noah kept looking at her, his eyes intense and full of expectation. He didn't know the lie. But Emma knew time was running out. At any moment, everything could come to light. The weight of the secret became a constant presence in Emma's life. Every time Noah smiled at her sincerely, every moment they shared, she felt the burden grow. She knew she had to tell the truth, about the agreement, about the deal with Oliver, but every time she tried, the guilt and fear of losing Noah paralyzed her. The weeks passed quickly. Emma and Noah, despite everything, grew closer. Noah talked about old dreams, future plans, and even how, for the first time in a long while, he felt like someone saw him for who he really was, not as Oliver Montgomery's son. One afternoon, as Emma was getting ready to meet him for another outing, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Oliver. "How's it going? I hope you're keeping him under control." The coldness of the message made her shiver. That abrupt reminder that everything she was living was, in fact, a lie brought her back to reality. Emma deleted the message, trying to push the thought away, but the discomfort followed her throughout the day with Noah. They spent the day together, walking through a quiet park outside the city. Noah was more relaxed than she had ever seen him, and as the day turned into night, he took her to a small photography studio he used in secret. The studio, a simple place with soft lights and walls covered in photos taken by Noah, revealed more about him than any words he could say. "I've never shown this place to anyone," he said, with a slight smile on his face as he adjusted the light on one of the cameras. "I come here when I need time for myself. When I need to remember who I really am." Emma looked around, absorbing every detail. There was a depth to Noah's work that she hadn't expected, and it made her feel even guiltier. He was opening up to her, trusting her. And she was living a lie. While Noah was adjusting the camera, a silent notification on Emma's phone caught her attention. She ignored it at first, but the phone buzzed again, insistently. It was a call. Without thinking, she quickly picked up the device and answered. "Emma?" Oliver's voice echoed through the phone. He sounded irritated. "I need to know what's happening. Noah hasn't talked to me, and things aren't going as expected. Remember the agreement?" Emma felt the ground slip from under her feet. She quickly hung up the call, but it was too late. "Agreement?" Noah's voice interrupted the tense silence of the studio. Emma turned, her heart racing. Noah stood a few meters away, his expression shifting from confused to dark. He didn't need more explanations. He understood in that moment that something was very wrong. "What are you hiding from me, Emma?" He took a step toward her, his eyes fixed, his breathing heavy. The tension between them was palpable. Emma tried to speak, but the words seemed stuck in her throat. The secret, the one she had been carrying for weeks, had finally exploded. "Noah. She began, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. "I wanted to tell you. I really did, but wanting isn't enough, Emma." Noah interrupted, his voice rising in a tone she had never heard before. He was furious, but worse than that, he was deeply hurt. "What's going on? What is this agreement you and my father have?" Emma took a deep breath, knowing she couldn't escape the truth any longer. "It was now or never. Your father, he paid me to." The words felt like they were tearing her throat. "To pretend to be in a relationship with you. He thought it would help you change, follow the path he wanted. I accepted because of the money, because I needed it to help my mother, but..." Noah took a step back, as if Emma's words had physically hit him. The shock on his face was impossible to hide. "So, everything was a lie?" His voice was quieter now, almost inaudible. "From the beginning?" Emma shook her head, tears now streaming down her face. "No, Noah. At first, yes, it was because of the agreement, but then everything changed. I really care about you. This is real. What I feel for you is real." But Noah couldn't hear that now. Not with the weight of the newly discovered betrayal. He took another step back, as if trying to distance himself emotionally and physically from the situation. "All of this was for money. You lied to me, just like my father." He shook his head, incredulous. "I can't believe you did this." Before Emma could respond, Noah grabbed his camera and walked out the door without saying another word. The sound of the door slamming reverberated through the studio, leaving Emma alone, drowning in her guilt and despair. Emma fell to her knees on the studio floor, the echo of the slamming door still ringing in her ears. Noah had discovered the truth, and now, she had to deal with the consequences of her choices. Emma's life had been in limbo since the moment Noah left the studio. The weeks that followed were a blur of regret and loneliness. She could barely sleep, and each morning, the weight of her betrayal seemed heavier. What had started as a simple agreement out of necessity had turned into an emotional disaster. What hurt the most, though, was that behind the lie, her feelings for Noah were real. And now, he was gone. Emma tried to return to her routine, but nothing felt right anymore. The distance between her and Noah was palpable, even with him not around. She knew he needed time, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had lost the only person she had truly connected with in years. At home, Emma's financial situation had stabilized a bit with the money she received from Oliver, and her mother was receiving the treatment she needed. That should have comforted her, but instead, it only increased her guilt. She felt dirty for accepting the deal, for selling her integrity, and especially for hurting Noah in the process. Meanwhile, Noah had disappeared. He wasn't answering calls, wasn't responding to messages, and Emma had no idea where he was. She knew he had distanced himself, both emotionally and physically, and maybe that's what he needed. He was dealing with the betrayal of his father and the fact that the only person he had begun to trust had also deceived him. Emma focused on taking care of her mother, but her heart wasn't in it. Every night, she replayed the moment when Noah discovered the truth, wishing she had told him sooner. Now, all she could do was wait. Wait and reflect on how her life had come to this point. Meanwhile, Noah had gone to a distant place, a small coastal town where no one knew him as Oliver Montgomery's son. He needed space to think, to process the avalanche of emotions that had hit him since discovering the truth. The anger he felt toward his father was mixed with the pain of knowing that Emma had been part of it all. But as the days passed, Noah began to realize something important: he could no longer define himself by anger or betrayal. He was tired of being seen only as the irresponsible heir, and this time away allowed him to reflect on who he really wanted to be. For the first time, he began to truly dedicate himself to photography, something that had always been just an escape, but now became his focus. In a small local art gallery, Noah managed to exhibit some of his photos. They were images captured in moments of vulnerability, a stormy sky over the sea, a child running alone on a deserted beach, and one special photo of Emma, taken in the park, when she had allowed herself to truly be seen. He didn't know why he still kept that photo. Perhaps because, despite everything, he couldn't hate her completely. One night, while closing the gallery after a successful exhibition, Noah received an unexpected message from his mother, Caroline Montgomery. She had always been more understanding than Oliver and seemed to understand what Noah was going through better than anyone else. The message was simple but loaded with meaning. Your father was wrong, but don't let this destroy what you really want. If Emma was sincere about her feelings, you should hear her out. Caroline's words hit him like a truth he had been avoiding. Noah knew he needed to confront his own feelings. He couldn't ignore what had happened, but he also couldn't move forward without understanding what Emma really felt. There was a part of him, though wounded, that wanted to hear her side of the story. Back in the city, Emma was finishing cleaning the kitchen when she heard a soft knock on the door. Her heart raced. She wasn't expecting visitors, and she couldn't imagine who it might be. When she opened the door, she nearly lost her breath. Noah was standing there, his face serious, but not as cold as the last time she had seen him. He looked tired, but there was something else in his eyes. Something she couldn't quite decipher. Can we talk? He asked, his voice calm but filled with tension. Emma nodded, her heart racing again. There were so many things she wanted to say, but she didn't know if he was ready to hear them. Noah entered the living room, looking around cautiously. When they finally sat down, the silence between them felt heavier than ever. Then he looked her in the eye, and asked the question Emma feared most. Was it all a lie? The silence in the room was suffocating. Emma could barely breathe. Sitting across from Noah, she felt the weight of all the choices she had made, all the lies she had told. Noah stared at her, waiting for answers. He already knew the truth, but now he wanted to understand something even more important, if, at any point, what they had shared had been real. Emma swallowed hard, her voice stuck in her throat. She knew the only way to regain Noah's trust was to be completely honest, even if it meant risking losing him forever. At first, yes, it was for the money, she began, without hesitation. I was desperate. My mother needed treatment, and I had no other choice. She paused for a second, struggling to stay calm. But Noah, what I feel for you, that was never part of the agreement. It was something that happened. Something I never planned. Noah watched her in silence. His eyes, though still filled with hurt, showed that he was listening, that he wanted to understand. So, at some point, everything changed? He asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Emma nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. Yes. I know that doesn't justify what I did. I know I hurt you, and I hate myself for it. But I was scared. Scared of losing you if I told you the truth. She wiped away a tear that escaped. By the time I realized what I felt, it was too late. The agreement, the deal, it all felt like a prison I couldn't escape. Noah looked away, as if he needed a moment to process everything. He ran a hand through his hair, the air heavy in his lungs. You should have trusted me, he finally said, his voice filled with pain. I was starting to trust you, Emma. For the first time, I felt like someone really saw me, not just as Oliver Montgomery's son. Emma lowered her head, feeling the weight of his words. He was right. She had betrayed him not only with the agreement, but with her lack of trust in him. I know, she murmured. I know I should have told you. But every time I tried, fear held me back. I know I can't change what I did, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know that my feelings for you are real. They always have been. Noah remained silent for a while, his gaze fixed on the floor. Emma could almost hear the sound of his heart beating hard in his chest. She didn't know what else to say, and the silence began to press down on her, becoming an unbearable weight. Finally, Noah stood up. He walked over to the window, looking outside, while Emma watched him, her eyes still wet with tears. After a long sigh, he turned to face her. "I need time, Emma. I need time to understand all this." He took a step forward, with a softer expression. "It's not easy to just forgive and forget. But I also know I can't ignore what I feel." Emma blinked, surprised. She had expected a harsher response, maybe even for him to leave again. You still want to see me?" Noah hesitated for a second, but then nodded slowly. "I don't know what's going to happen from here. I don't know if I can trust you again. But I know I can't just erase what we had. So maybe, with time." He left the sentence unfinished. A small wave of relief washed over Emma. He wasn't ready to forgive her completely, but he was willing to try to understand. That was more than she had dared hope for. "I hope that, with time, you'll see that what we had, what we still have, is worth fighting for," Emma said, her voice low but full of sincerity. Noah stepped closer to her, his eyes now less filled with pain and more open to what could come next. "I need you to know that it won't be easy. It will take time, and I still need space. But I'm willing to try, Emma." She nodded, trying to control her emotions. She knew the road would still be long, but that moment, that small opening, was the first step. Noah sighed and, after a brief silence, pulled something from his jacket pocket, a photo. He handed it to Emma, and she saw that it was the picture Noah had taken of her in the park, weeks ago. The portrait captured a moment of vulnerability and honesty, when she had felt truly seen. "I took this because I saw you, Emma," he said, with a soft smile on his lips. "And I think I still see you." Emma held the photo carefully, tears falling silently down her face. It was a small symbol of hope, and she knew this would be the beginning of something new. Something that, despite everything, could be real. Noah took a step toward the door, ready to leave. But before opening it, he turned and looked at Emma one last time, with a question filled with emotion. "Do you still want to write this story with me?" Months had passed since that night when Noah and Emma finally talked. Both had followed their own paths, but with a new perspective. There was no rush, no unrealistic expectations, just a slow and careful process of healing, where time worked in their favor. Emma, who had spent so long trapped in guilt and circumstances, began to discover who she really was. With the financial stability she had gained, she decided to explore an old passion she had always set aside, writing. At first, writing was just a way to express her feelings, a way to process all the pain and regret she had carried. But over time, she began to find a unique voice in her words. Her first pieces were about her personal experiences, short stories that explored human dilemmas, difficult choices, and the power of redemption. Writing became a form of therapy, and soon she found herself immersed in a new creative journey. Without realizing it, Emma began to gain confidence, something she had lacked before. It was as if, by putting her emotions on paper, she was finally freeing herself from the shadows that had followed her for so long. As for Noah, he devoted himself entirely to photography, something that had always been more than a hobby for him. Away from his father's shadow, he pursued his own ambitions, participating in exhibitions and even being recognized for his talent in capturing moments of truth, moments when people showed who they really were, just as he had learned to do himself. The distance between them had been necessary. Both knew that without time to grow and understand their own emotions, any attempt at reconciliation would be fragile. But now, as the months passed, the wounds were beginning to heal. Gradually, they started communicating again, first with occasional messages, then with more frequent conversations. Forgiveness was something that took time, but Emma knew it was being built, step by step. Noah, in turn, was also learning to trust again, to accept that love, like photography, wasn't always perfect. It was full of shadows and lights, highs and lows, but it was real. On an autumn afternoon, Noah was in a small gallery in the city, organizing his new exhibition. The The photos were a combination of his recent travels and intimate moments he had captured in people he had met along the way. He was adjusting the lighting on one of the photos when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Looks like the photographer is doing well." Noah turned and saw Emma standing at the entrance of the gallery. She smiled timidly, but there was a confidence in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. She was different. More self-assured, more comfortable with who she was. He smiled back, with a quiet surprise. "And the writer? How is she doing?" Emma laughed, shaking her head. "Still trying to figure that out. But, it's going well." She took a few steps toward him, looking around at the photos on the wall. "Your photos, they're incredible, Noah. You've really found your voice." "I think so." He shrugged, but there was a glint of pride in his eyes. "It's been a long road, but I finally feel like I'm in the right place." They stood in silence for a moment, both absorbing the meaning of what they had just said. They were in their own right places, something they needed to find before they could find each other again. Emma looked at one of the photos, one in particular that made her smile. It was of her, the same one Noah had taken in the park months before. The image captured her naturally, without the mask she used to hide her insecurities. "That one," Emma began, her voice soft. "It's still my favorite." Noah stepped closer, standing beside her as he looked at the photo. "It's my favorite too," he said, looking at her, not the image. "Because that's the moment I saw the real Emma." Emma blushed slightly, but didn't look away. "And do you think you can trust the real Emma now?" Noah was silent for a moment before smiling. "I think I already do. And I think we can start over, without agreements, without lies." They stood facing each other, the weight of everything they had been through hanging between them, but now in a lighter way. They knew the road to this point hadn't been easy, but they also knew they had a chance to build something real. This time, without secrets, without fears. Just them, and whatever was possible from that point on. "And about that question you asked me?" Noah asked, with a slight teasing tone. Emma frowned, confused for a second, until she remembered the night he had left her apartment. He had asked if she still wanted to write that story with him. "I think the question is still open," she said, smiling with a glint of amusement. "But I'm ready to start writing." Noah laughed, a light and carefree sound. "Then let's do it together. Page by page." They left the gallery together, walking side by side, ready to start over. There were no guarantees, no grand promises. But there was something much more important, the choice to move forward together, step by step, page by page. And for Emma and Noah, that was enough. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment, and check out our next story.